Good morning. So, there's an article about a memorial in Madison, Alabama, that people are trying to raise money to take down, or basically to pay the fine for removing it. And the memorial says something about being a reminder of the principles of the Confederate Army, or of the Confederacy. And so I ended up writing a blog post over at HeroLFG.com called Civil War Persuasion Game. And basically it starts out talking about how, I've long kind of loathed Abraham Lincoln because I blame him for the deaths of over 500,000 Americans, because I like to believe that a deal could have been made where war was avoided, slavery was ended, but the United States dissolved, the Union dissolved. And it's my claim, and I've read speeches and letters from Abraham Lincoln that basically said that his number one principle was federalism and maintaining the Union. And so one of the principles, if you were going to fight against the Union, one of the principles could be anti-federalism, which is one of my principles. I'm not a fan of federalism. When the Constitution was being created, when the United States government, as we know it, was being created, I would have been one of the many people who voted against Madison, who voted against Hamilton, who would have been a writer in the anti-federalist papers against the Federalist Papers. And it was a close vote, a very close vote in a lot of states, and in most states. And so it's not like everyone in the United States wanted to create this union, this federalist government, but Abraham Lincoln, that was his number one principle above all else. And bringing slavery, the topic of slavery, into the picture was part of a persuasion game, which ultimately helped him win. It was one of the factors that helped the Union win the war. But I ended up going and doing some research, trying to find some numbers, because I've listened to Stefan Molyneux YouTube video about where he talks about the truth about slavery, and the numbers for slavery seemed lower. It seemed low, and it seemed like perhaps my ancestors in the South maybe they weren't slave owners. And so I went looking for some other numbers, and I found the 1860 census that said that 35% of families in Alabama owned slaves. And so that looked fishy to me. And so I just raised some questions about those numbers. How accurate was the census? And what about individuals who were part of families who disagreed with the practice of slavery? And what about forms of slavery where there was opportunity? I've heard about a family in Mexico where they still have forms of slavery, where they're called the help, where some families, they will have help that continues to be helped generation after generation, but you could have families, and there are families, who put the helped children in through college so that the children become free. And so there's different kinds of slavery. And so that I raised that question as well. And so President Lincoln, I know he did not like slavery, and I don't like slavery. So I'm an anti-federalist against owning human beings, because federalism actually is a form of slavery. it's a form of slavery in that right now the government takes 1/3 of my paycheck. It's theft. So it's not really slavery, it's theft, but there are similarities. But and so what I would have preferred a deal where states can leave the Union if they got on a path to end slavery. And I believe this could have happened. It happened in other governments. And so that would have been my preferred path. And kind of the final analysis of the Civil War was just a recognition of situations and phenomena related to war, and specifically related to destructive war. And so you can have an army invade someone's homeland, and you will create enemies, because enemies will defend their homeland, they will defend their family and their property. And so this is how this phenomena of creating enemies occurs. Also, you could have extremists go and invade someone else's homeland and cause a retaliation and create enemies, so that there's a back and forth of invading homelands and creating enemies. And so I asked the question, is the situation of a Confederate soldier defending their homeland from the destruction caused by the Union military, is that similar to maybe Islamic soldiers who defend their families and their homeland from the destruction caused by the United States military? I raise that question because that form of destructive war ultimately has this risk of creating enemies and existing perpetually. And so I make reference to Genghis Khan, he understood this problem, so he would go into after he would defeat a city, he would require all of the males to join his army, and if they wouldn't join his army, he would execute them. And I also made reference to the Japanese, where the United States dropped these terrible bombs on the Japanese. And so it's that kind of destruction, that scale of destruction, using weapons of mass destruction and just indiscriminately murdering people, that can end that destructive war. It has to just be cataclysmic. And so I actually prefer forms of warfare, information warfare, where you are trying to win minds and bring forth ideas. And so, that's what I'm a fan of. And I believe that if Abraham Lincoln had any sense of morality combined with wisdom, he could have avoided the murder of over 500,000 Americans in the Civil War. So, but it's very rare that you get an honest politician who is also ethical and wise. You usually need in a democracy, you need a dishonest, persuasive politician or a persuasive person who has compassion and wisdom and uses persuasion and influence and basically lies and deception to win and to get into the office, and then do the things which are best for the country. Which, for example, if Donald Trump had been elected president prior to the Civil War, he could have potentially created a deal where every state ends up ending slavery over a period of time, and there is not the death of over 500,000 Americans, and you end up with a decentralized, non-federalist government. And in that case, in my opinion, we would have a government today and an economy today that would be orders of magnitude better than what it is today, because of the increased number of laboratories for experimentation. So that's my claim, that's my thought, it's my analysis on the Civil War, the Confederacy, the Union, and war in general, and ideal politicians in a democracy in general, considering the fact that most people have average intelligence and respond with emotions instead of reason and logic. That's it.